Hi, I'm Senator Aaron Osmond. It's a pleasure to be with you for a few minutes. A few months ago, I surprised the public education world here in Utah when I suggested that we ought to consider repealing compulsory education in our state. I understand that. I would like to take the opportunity to share with you the real thoughts and reasons why I would suggest such an interesting idea. It's important for you to understand that I care deeply about public education. As a parent, as a concerned citizen, as a policymaker, public education is very important to me. Specifically, there are a couple of principles I want to share with you. Number one, I believe it's critically important that every child in our state have an opportunity to be educated. Number two, I believe it's also important that we respect and preserve the rights of parents to decide the educational pathway of their children. Number three, I think it's critically important that we focus on academic success, not just attendance of our children in education. If we only focus on attendance, I believe we're missing the critical accountability that we have to the taxpayers for the use of their funds, remembering that public education is not free. It costs billions of dollars. Now, I've had an opportunity since I made that statement to meet with education leaders and experts across the state. I've talked to concerned citizens, policymakers, education leaders, anyone who would talk to me about these concepts. And I am now ready to share with you, the public, what I really want to suggest relative to compulsory education in our state. I'm calling these principles and policies parent choice and accountability in education here in Utah. Now, I recognize that there are a lot of individuals who may have concerns or ideas or suggestions on how to improve these ideas. This is exactly why I'm revealing these concepts so far in the future, literally months before the 2014 general session. I'm seeking your feedback and involvement in improving these ideas and concepts to achieve a far better legislative outcome. I now have an opportunity to explain to you the actual proposals I have relative to the discussion of compulsory education. I look forward to this dialogue, and I hope that you'll take a chance to maybe make some notes and try to better understand this proposal as I go through it. First of all, I want to help you understand what actually are the issues or challenges that I was trying to solve in these proposals. I call them the Big Eight. It's pretty simple. These 8 topics really define what it is we want to get solved with these 3 proposals I'm going to share with you. First, I believe that our current law is hyper-focused on attendance and not on academic performance. The reality is that these kids are being pushed to attend school, but we really don't have any law to pull them through the education system and ensure success in school, and that we need to solve that. I believe the scale is unbalanced. Second, I believe that we have some real challenges with academic results for our most at-risk kids, which, by the way, are the very kids we're trying to save with our focus on compulsory education. If you look at this chart, you can see that we have some real challenges with our most at-risk kids when it comes to graduation, as well as just general performance dynamics. Third, all this is a funny slide. At the end of the day, it really is a reflection of what educators and district leaders across the state are telling me. We're seeing a growing disengagement of parents in public education, which is a major concern. We know through research that parents play a critical role in the success of their child in public education, and the reality is we're seeing a disengagement across the system. Even though you may not see it in your school, trust me, it's throughout the state, even in our more affluent areas. Fourth, we have a growing lack of parental support for educator discipline in the classroom. We even have parents that are upset when their child is disciplined in any way in the classroom, which creates a real challenge for teachers to educate rather than be social workers. Fifth, the reality is in our current system that there really aren't any meaningful consequences for academic failure or challenges from an academic perspective. It's really a sad situation that parents and students don't really believe that they'll be held accountable in public education, even though they're required to be there and to sit in that seat. Sixth, I have found as I've studied this issue that there are many unnecessary restrictions that are being placed on homeschooler parents. where they have the right to homeschool, but they feel like they're obligated to do things that they would rather not do relative to the education of their own children. Seventh, I believe that we as a state, in order to achieve academic excellence in our state, and I understand why, but we have an over-focus, a hyper-focus on educator and administrator accountability in public education. But you know what's lacking from my view? A lack of parent and student accountability in our system. That needs to change. Eighth, as part of the compulsory education discussion, we've established a requirement that says kids must be in a classroom for 180 days for 990 hours a year, that somehow is a formula for success. And we're mandating that at the state level. I believe it's time to re-engage our local districts and parents and let them decide what's the right blend of time in the classroom versus teacher preparation or teacher professional development. We need to re-empower that local control. So, those are the main concepts that I'm trying to solve, the concerns that I have about current compulsory education law. Let's talk now about my proposed solutions. They're really identified in three major categories. First, I want to reinforce parental freedom, the right of a parent to choose a child's educational pathway, and I want them to make that decision when a child is at age to be able to go into public education. We'll talk about that more. Second, I want to establish stronger parental rights and stronger accountability when using the resource of public education. We'll get to that more as well. And then finally, I want to enable greater local control, more local school and district control over the amount of time a child is required to be in the classroom to focus on academic excellence and achievement rather than just having a butt in the seat at the end of the day. So let's go to the first one. First of all, the parental right to educational freedom. This is my first bill that I'll be proposing in the session. What it says is that we are going to ask every parent in the state, when their child arrives at the age of 6 years of age, or when they're new to a district, that they're going to be asked to make an educational pathway decision. They're going to have to choose whether they want to homeschool, or go to private school, or go to public school. And that choice will be something that they do utilizing an affidavit. So every parent, whether they choose homeschool, private school, or public school, will indicate at that critical age what their educational pathway decision is. We're doing this because we believe it's important that every child be educated. And we want to ensure that parent understands it's not only their right, but it's their obligation to make that choice. Now, once parents choose homeschooling or private schooling, they'll only have to sign that affidavit one time. Under current statute, we require them to sign it every single year. In fact, on the private school side, we don't even require private school parents to make any educational affidavit decision. This levels the playing field, allowing every parent to indicate one time what their pathway will be for their child. Now, for parents that choose homeschooling or private schooling, we're going to say to them, we're changing compulsory education law. We're not going to have them be responsible to follow what the state wants them to teach or the amount of hours the state wants them to actually be in school. We're going to say you as a parent have the responsibility for the education of your child without oversight or interference from the state. Let's talk a little bit more about what we do expect or what we will enable for homeschool and private school families that make that decision. First, they will have the freedom to utilize and teach any curriculum that they want, with any instructional schedule, without false restrictions from the state about what they should do and when they should do it. We're also going to enable homeschool parents and private school parents with the option to elect to restrict all personal data about their child from any state reporting or data sharing to any entity, whether it be the federal government or the state or any private entity. Now, these rights may seem like things that are logical or may even exist today. The reality is that we put these restrictions today on private school and homeschool parents that are unnecessary. I believe that it's important for us as a state to say, once you've made your educational pathway decision outside of public school, that you have the freedom to approach public education the way that you want to without interference from the state. Now, what if you want to come back to public school? One area of accountability, though, for parents here is that we're going to say, you know what, if you want to come back and re-enroll your child in public education, you need to have an age-appropriate assessment of that child before they come back into public ed. And we're going to place that child in public ed at the grade level that best matches that child's academic level. And if remediation is required, if your child isn't at the age-appropriate level they should be, that the parent may be responsible to pay for some or all of the cost of remediation for that child. Because the parent chose to educate that child at home, the expectation is that they will be educated and that they'll be educated at the right level so that that child could re-enter public education at their peer level or higher. Now let's talk about the choice to move into public education. If a parent makes the decision that they want to enroll their child into public school, which is a public resource paid for by public tax dollars, there's going to be, under this piece of legislation, a new requirement. That requirement is that a parent is going to have to sign a public education participation contract. That contract is going to ensure that the parent understands both their obligations and the expectations of the system on them and their student. This contract is signed each time a student enters into school, so elementary school, middle school, or high school, or when they change districts, they would be required to sign this new contract. Now, this contract says that the parents will do the following: that they'll support the local school district attendance policies, that they'll support educators and treat them as professionals and understand that they have to administer appropriate discipline for behavioral problems in the classroom. Number 3, that they agree and understand the importance of attending all scheduled parent-teacher conferences. Number 4, that they'll support their child in completing homework and other assignments as a critical part of their academic success. And then the most important, and frankly one of the most, I think, changing culturally types of decisions that are going to be made under this contract is the decision that, you know what, if a child is unsuccessful from an academic perspective, that they will be held accountable for that, and that the parent may have to pay for part or all of the cost of remediation according to the family's ability to pay for that cost. Again, public education is not free. It's an important resource that we have to all pay for as taxpayers, and if a child fails to succeed academically, there will be required remediation, and parents may have to pay for all or part of that cost, something that will be decided at the district level. Now, as far as a parent's rights, parents, if they sign these contracts, are going to want to know, what are my rights when using public education? I believe that we should have a parent Bill of Rights. In this Bill of Rights, the parent has the right to reasonable accommodations. These accommodations, I believe, should be the right to decide to hold back a child for maturity reasons, the right to influence selection of a child's teacher. It's the right to authorize excused absences for family activities or needs without the need of a medical professional signing off on it. It's the right to have flexibility and options when attending parent-teacher conferences. And then finally, the right to have a child test out of options for a child to graduate early. Now again, the key here is a reasonable accommodation. It may not always be possible, but the parent has the right to expect reasonable accommodation in these areas when using the resource of public education. Now, at the end of the day, we all recognize that some parents will need to be held accountable for their failure to follow through on this contract, or their child's failure to follow through on the obligations of this contract that we make when participating in public education. The only ways that compulsory education will be able to enforce, if you will, this accountability is when a parent fails to formally select an educational option for an eligible child at 6 years of age or when they move into a district. And second, when they fail to fulfill the parent-guardian obligations under the public school participation agreement. All of the current compulsory education law is appropriately enforced in this particular setting. I am not suggesting that we change anything relative to compulsory law relative to the ability of the state to enforce these obligations upon parents when they decide to use the resource of public education. That's the entire concept. Now, when a student fails to meet minimum public education proficiency requirements, we want to reinforce that a student will be required to attend summer school and or receive tutoring support. And again, a parent will be required to pay for all or some of the cost of remediation or tutoring costs. Now, an obvious exception to this are children with documented medical or physical handicaps that are exempted from this policy. But all other children and their parents are capable of achieving academic success and meeting these minimum obligations, and they will be held accountable when using this public resource. Now finally, let's talk about local control in classroom time. As I mentioned before, our state has a requirement that school districts must require 180 days, 990 hours of classroom attendance time. I believe that we need to repeal that. We need to remove that and enable districts to determine locally their own attendance guidelines so that they can decide the balance between teacher preparation days, teacher development days, and classroom time to achieve the best academic outcome. Let's ensure that our local school districts also will not lose any base funding based on the amount of time that they decide to spend in classrooms. Now again, the three proposals are: let's reinforce a parent's right to choose and obligation to choose a child's educational pathway. In Bill number 2, let's establish a stronger parental right and accountability when using the resource of public education in our state. And finally, let's enable greater local control over classroom time, allowing our local districts to make those decisions. Now that was a very high level and quick summary of what these pieces of legislation are. Again, I encourage you to reach out to me and ask me about these ideas and discuss them in more detail. Here is my contact information, and I thank you so much for spending the time to hear the details of this proposal. Thank you so much for watching this video presentation. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn about these concepts. I would like to invite you to reach out to me now. Give me your feedback. Share with me your ideas on how I can improve these concepts to have a much better legislative outcome. You can reach me directly at my email and my cell phone address. Let me give that to you now. avosmond@gmail.com is my email. And you can call me on my cell phone number at 801-897-8127. I look forward to talking with you about these ideas. Thanks so much.